Is it sometimes correct to skip pesukei dezimra in order to daven with the congregation?
The first thing to know regarding this question is that it is not at all a new question. This matter has been discussed going back at least 1300 years, and I will mention some of the statements regarding this question in a moment. But before we do that, it's important to know, first of all, that pesukei dezimra are not ahova. They are not obligatory. It is something very proper and very correct to do on a regular daily basis, and that is what we all do. But it is nevertheless important to know, both with regards to this question and with regards to many questions in halacha, in Torah, what the level of obligation regarding a certain mitzvah or a certain action is, and what is the proper attitude towards a particular point of Jewish law. Is it something that is of paramount importance, or something that is perhaps not quite so paramount? With regards to pesukei dezimra, we have the explicit statement in the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Shabbat, where the practice of saying pesukei dezimra on a daily basis, that is to say, to recite certain chapters from the book of Tehillim, of Psalms, together with a beracha, a blessing that is recited before and after those chapters, before reading Kriyat Shema, and before the tefillah, the Shmoneh Esrei tefillah in the morning, as a preparation for those two more paramount and more central aspects of the daily prayers, namely Shema and tefillah. The idea of doing this is mentioned in the Talmud, but it is mentioned using the following language. It says, Yeheh helki im gomrei ha'alel b'chol yom, which the Talmud explains is referring to pesukei dezimra. Yeheh helki means, may my portion be in the world to come with those who do such and such. That does not imply an absolute chova, an absolute obligation. Rather, this implies something which is praiseworthy and very much recommended and encouraged, but not an absolute chova. And that is why we see in the Sidur of Rav Saadia Gaon on page 32, when he begins to discuss pesukei dezimra, he writes, "V'hitnodava umafenu likro mizmorim misefer Tehillim tishbrachot HaKadosh Baruch Hu ulifnehem u'acharehem shtei berachot." He says, our nation has volunteered, has taken upon itself, hitnodava umafenu, to do this thing, this practice of reciting certain chapters from Sefer Tehillim and to recite a bracha before and after. The fact that he uses that terminology is of course very plain and telling. It comes to make clear that this is not an absolute chova, and therefore it follows that if it's impossible for a person to recite pesukei dezimra and pray with the Sibur, with the congregation, from Baruch Hu, from the beginning of the brachot of Kriyat Shema onwards, if these two things are mutually exclusive because he came so late, then it is obvious which should take preference. And the very same thing we find in the Rambam. Rambam writes in Ilchot Tefillah, Perek Zayin, Halacha Yod Bet 7:12, "V'shibbahu hachamim horishonim," the sages of old praised those l'mi shekoreh zemirot misefer Tehillim b'chol yom, those who read certain chapters of Sefer Tehillim, the book of Psalms, every day. And then he goes on to describe that there are brachot, a bracha before and afterwards, and that it is also the standard custom to add further pesukim before and after. But the point is that Rambam also very clearly does not write Hayav Adam, one is required to do, as he would normally do in such a case, if it was an absolute obligation, a hovah, he writes, وَشِبَّهُ hachamim. The sages praised such a practice and those people who take upon themselves this practice. It would appear that in more ancient times, going back 1800, 1700 years, the practice of reciting these pesukei dezimra before Kriyat Shema and Tefillah was not something that all Jews did on a daily basis. I imagine that initially on weekdays a minority of people accepted this practice upon themselves, and probably on Shabbat and Yom Tov it was something that the entire congregation did or began to pick up from those few more pious people perhaps during the week who were doing this. And over time, as with many things, this became a standard part of the daily prayer. And even when it does become part of the daily prayer routine, nevertheless, the essential status of pesukei dezimra as being something auxiliary and secondary in importance to Shema and Tefillah does not change. And therefore, this already allows us to approach this question from a correct and Torah true perspective. So, having understood the status and purpose of pesukei dezimra, in other words, to help us focus and place ourselves in the right frame of mind for Shema and Tefillah, we can now read what the Tur writes in Siman Nun Beth. The Tur, of course, is Rabbeinu Yaakov ben Harosh, the son of the Rosh. His famous work, the Tur, is one of the classic halachic texts, and he writes as follows: Ve'im ba levet ha'knesset, if a person comes to the shul, Umasa sibur besof pesukei dezimra, and he finds that he's late apparently, and he finds that the congregation is already well into pesukei dezimra, perhaps even towards the end of pesukei dezimra. Arzeh sha'alu leRav Natronai. This question was asked of Rav Natronai Gaon, going back nearly 1300 years. Ma'u she'yitpalel im hasibur v'yomar pesukei dezimra ahar kach. The question that was asked of Rav Natronai Gaon was, in such a case, is it perhaps more correct that the person prays with the sibur? In other words, he's with the sibur and he listens to the shliach sibur from Baruch Hu onwards, and therefore he says the brachot of Kriyat Shema with the sibur, with the shliach sibur, and Shema and Tefillah, and after the entire Tefillah is over, he can then say pesukei dezimra, which he missed, which he was not able to say. In response, Rav Natronai said, "V'heshiv she'no yachol." This is not possible. To say pesukei dezimra afterwards is not possible. Ki tikkanu kodem tefillah, because the takana was the idea, the practice, the basis of this practice, including the brachot, which are part of pesukei dezimra, were intended to be said before the tefillah, and therefore what he's saying is that you cannot say these brachot after the tefillah. Ela, so what should a person do? Ela omer baruch she'amar ad muhulal batishbahot. He should say the first bracha, which is recited before pesukei dezimra. That is to say, baruch she'amar. Wa omer tilal adawid. In other words, after baruch she'amar, the person should say Mizmor Kof Memhei, Psalm 145, which starts with the words Tilal Dawid. It's also known as Ashrei Yoshevei Beitecha. Umedaleg, and then he should skip the other prakim, the other chapters that are usually recited, Ad Halalu El Bekodsho, which is the last chapter of Sefer Tehillim, Kuf Nun 150. And after that, وَحُثَمْ بِإِشْتَبَّهْ, and end by saying the bracha after pesukei dezimra, which is ishtabah. وَمَمَهَيْرْ يِتْپَلَلْ عِمَ السِّبُور, and then he should make sure that he immediately begins to pray with the sibur, who are probably already starting Birkot Kriyat Shema. وَلَا يُمَرْ أُثَمَ هَرْ هَتَفِلَا كُرْ إِكَار, and a person should not recite pesukei dezimra after the tefillah at all. I'll return to this point in a moment of reciting pesukei dezimra and how one might do that after the tefillah. We'll get back to that in a moment. So, first let us sum up what we have seen here so far. The Tur quotes a teshuvah, a response, sent by Rav Natunai Gaon, who was asked, is it possible for a person who came late to daven with the Sibur from Shema, Kriyat Shema, Brikot Kriyat Shema and Tefillah, and afterwards make up for the fact that he did not recite pesukei dezimra by saying them after the Tefillah. Rav Natunai Gaon says this is not possible. And it is quite clear that he means to say by this that the barachot, Baruch She'amar and Yishtabah, which are recited with pesukei dezimra, may not be said after the tefillah because they were intended to be said only beforehand. The Tur goes on and says, "Wazal Lashon Adoni Avi Arosh Zara." My father, the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, wrote as follows in the name of Rav Amram Gaon. Rav Amram Gaon came lived a couple of generations after Rav Natunai Gaon. He frequently quotes Rav Natunai Gaon. In this case, Rav Amram Gaon disagrees somewhat, slightly, with Rav Natunai, and he says, "Im nichnas adam levet haKnesset." If a person arrived in the shul, v'ro'eh she'im yomar kol elu ha'pesukim, and if he sees that if he was to start saying all of pesukei dezimra that he normally says, lo yuchal lahashlim u'litparel tefilato im hasibur, he will not be able to say the essential, the most fundamental parts of the tefillah, that is to say Shema and the tefillah, the Shemona Esrei, with the Sibur, with the congregation. Yomar Baruch She'amar o Mizmor Shel Tehillah LeDavid Bilevad. What he should do in that case is say only Baruch She'amar till the end of that baracha, and the Mizmor Tehillah LeDavid, which is Kof Mem Hey 145. Only that. V'haltem be'ishtabah. That's what he should do. It should be pointed out that Rav Natunai Gaon and Rav Amram Gaon are not necessarily disagreeing with each other. It may in fact be only a question of the available time. If the person sees that he has, shall we say, 4 minutes in order to say whatever pesukei dezimra he's going to be able to say at this point before the Sibur, before the congregation gets to Baruch Hu and Shema, in that case he may be able to do as Rav Natunai Gaon says, that is to say, Baruch She'amar, Tehillah LeDavid, Halaru El B'Kodsho, the last chapter of Tehillim, and then Ishtabah. But if the person sees he only has 2.5 minutes, shall we say, that may not be feasible and may not be desirable. It is better to say less and with more kavanah, with more concentration and focus, than to say more with less concentration and focus. This is also written by the Tur himself and in the Shulchan Aruch as well, at the very beginning of the Tur and the very beginning of the Shulchan Aruch. And therefore, it could be that Rav Amram Gaon is talking about a situation where less time is available. So there's no obvious disagreement. The underlying principle is very simply that pesukei dezimra comes to prepare us and as we said, to place ourselves in the correct frame of mind for Shema and Tefillah, and where we must dispense with most of those pesukei dezimra in order to get to the main part with the congregation, which is also a very important part of the regular tefillah, of the daily prayers, then that is what one should do. Then the Torah goes on to mention one more opinion. V'chathavu b'shem harav Rabbeinu Yonah. It is written in the name of Rabbeinu Yonah, one of the famous Rishonim from Sepharad, from Spain. Shamar Amar b'shem Rabotha. When Rabbeinu Yonah said this in the name of his own teachers. She'im nichnas b'sha'a sheshneh sibur mathil yoser or. If a person arrives in shul as they are already beginning Birkot Kriyat Shema, so he obviously has 0 time to say pesukei dezimra. Ve'en lo shehuth lomar afilu Tehillah LeDavid. He doesn't even have time to say Tehillah LeDavid, that is to say Ashrei. In that case, tov hu sheyikra Kriyat Shema b'virchotea. It is correct that he dispense entirely with pesukei dezimra at that moment, at that point. say he should recite Kriyat Shema with the brachot and tefillah and the Shmoneh Esrei im HaSibur with the congregation. V'achar kach, and after the end of the tefillah, yikra pesukei dezimra ima berachot shelifnehem v'shel achreihem. And then afterwards he can say all the pesukei dezimra with the brachot. Lefisha tefillah rusuya mukobelet im HaSibur. Because praying with the sibur, with the congregation, answering the various parts where the congregation is to answer in response to what the Shliach Sibur says, for example, and the actual tefillah itself with the congregation, these are very important things, in fact more important. This last opinion of Rabbeinu Yonah and certain other Chachamim, that one may recite all of pesukei dezimra, including the brachot of Baruch She'amar and Yishtabach after the tefillah, this point is controversial. Many Rishonim and Ahronim disagree with this, and it is correct not to do so. That is to say, to recite all the pesukim and all the parakim of Tehillim and the collections of pesukim that make up the usual standard daily pesukei dezimra, to say any of those things after the tefillah without barachot is clearly permissible. How could it be otherwise? A person clearly can always read any part of the Tanakh, learn any perek in Tehillim or any other place in the Tanakh. It is in fact the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, and also part of the overall concept of Avodat Hashem. And reading pesukim from Tehillim or anywhere else in the Tanakh is obviously a very wonderful and worthwhile endeavor, and no one could possibly claim it's asur. When Rav Natunai Gaon said it is asur to say these pesukei dezimra after the tefillah, he was obviously referring only to the barachot. Rabbeinu Yonah disagrees apparently, and he says that one may say the barachot even after the tefillah. And as I say, on this point there is much controversy. The Ramban and other Rishonim and the Maharshal and many others have expressed their view that this is entirely incorrect and must not be done. And that is the halacha. The halacha is that if one has absolutely no time to say any part of pesukei dezimra before the Sibur starts saying the brachot of Yoser Or and Kriyat Shema, etc., then one skips entirely at that moment in time pesukei dezimra. One davens with the Sibur, and afterwards one can say as many or as few of pesukei dezimra, the various pesukim and the parakim from Tehillim, as many or as few as one wishes to do after the tefillah, without the brachot. So when it comes to this view of Rabbeinu Yonah, we do not accept this position because of the hashash, and a very reasonable hashash, that these brachot might be levatala, may be unnecessary or incorrect. It would be incorrect to say these brachot after the tefillah, but to recite the various pesukim, there is obviously no issue at all. That is the halacha. I should also point out that there are certain poskim Sfaradim, not all poskim Sfaradim, but there are some who claim, based on Kabbalistic claims and ideas, that despite what we have just read in all these sources, nevertheless, and this is, by the way, what we have read here also appears in the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Nun Beth, the very same ideas. Nevertheless, there are some Sfaradi poskim who have claimed that according to the Kabbalah, according to the Zohar, it is not correct to miss pesukei dezimra. It is necessary to say the entire tefillah in its entirety according to the usual order of things. In other words, one cannot skip pesukei dezimra. Each part of the tefillah, the Kot HaShahar, pesukei dezimra, and of course also korbanot, pesukei dezimra, Shema with the brachot, and then tefillah, etc. Everything has to follow one in the footsteps of the other in a very particular order, and therefore, if one does not have time to say pesukei dezimra and to daven with the sibur, one actually should prefer to not daven with the congregation and to say pesukei dezimra at one's own pace, in one's own time, etc. There is such an opinion, but this opinion should not be followed. I stress, this opinion should not be followed. And even many posakim Sfaradim disagree with this opinion. There is a famous, well-known teshuvah of the Hacham Savi, Siman Lamadwa, where he addresses this issue as well, and he also criticizes very vociferously those who make such a claim in the name of the Zohar and the Kabbalah, that one should act in a manner which is not as described by the poskim, not based on sound halachic reasoning. And he mentions there that there are many things that all kinds of people who study the Zohar and the Kabbalah think they understand and reach various conclusions based on their understandings, which are frequently not correct at all, not at all what the Zohar or the Ari or what have you, or the different Mekubalim intended. And one can also find this view expressed in Yalkut Yosef of Rav Ovadia Yosef Zatzal. So, in conclusion, there is no question that pesukei dezimra, although it is important and highly recommended, and we are encouraged to do so every day, and we should always, of course, come to Shul on time. In fact, we should get there before the official starting time in order to hit the ground running, so to speak. Nevertheless, if one has to skip either parts of pesukei dezimra or all of pesukei dezimra in order to say the essential and fundamental parts of the tefillah with the sibur, that is to say Shema and tefillah, one should do so. There is one more thing I will add here, and that is a person might ask, why did the Rambam not mention, or one could also ask the same question regarding Rav Sa'adia Gaon that we mentioned at the beginning. Why did they not mention what one should do if one comes late to Shul? And the answer to that is very simple, and I think also illuminating in terms of understanding their methodology and their thinking. First of all, they told us, both Rav Sa'adia Gaon, who wrote Hitnadava Umathenu, our nation has taken upon itself, has volunteered to do this practice of reciting pesukei dezimra, which already tells you that it is of a lower level in terms of its importance with regards to the overall concept of tefillah. So therefore one could already from that understand that if there's no time, well, it has to be skipped for today, and the lesson to be learned is to come on time. And the same is true for the Rambam. Rambam tells us that the Chachamim shibbahu, that the Chachamim praised people who did this on a regular basis, and from this we are to learn that one should do so. But the very fact that Rambam worded this statement in such a fashion is really sufficient to tell us all that we need to know. Because if we understand that it is not an absolute chovah based on that usage of that language, shibahu chachamim, that the chachamim praised such a practice but did not make it obligatory, then we also understand everything we have explained in this shiur, namely that pesukei dezimra comes to serve the tefillah, but should not in any way be allowed to interfere with a full and proper recitation and practice with regards to the more essential and more central parts of the tefillah.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.